Oh my gosh, I'm always asked, how do you get that note up there? How do you get from here to here? Not just landing anywhere, but landing exactly on the A. Well, it has to do with something I like to call the geography of the fingerboard. It's like the geography of the earth. One should know that Hamburg is in northern Germany, Munich is in southern Germany, and Stuttgart is west of Vienna. If you have to find your way from one point to another, having some kind of orientation is necessary. We cellists have this length of the fingerboard at our disposal, and we have to learn how to move on it, how to achieve security, what to do here, what to do there, what's needed in certain spots. The geography of the fingerboard is the terminology coined by my eminent teacher, Janos Starker, which I continue to use because it's so helpful. Dealing with this, we first have thumb positions whenever we use the thumb. They range over the entire fingerboard. Most of the time we only play up here with the thumb, but sometimes we use it down here too. Then we have the 3-finger positions whenever we play with 3 fingers, and the 4-finger positions whenever we play with 4 fingers. These groupings don't discard the traditional first, second, and third and fourth positions. They just make things a little easier to understand. For example, when I play up here, figuring out where I am in the 15th or 14th position doesn't make much of a difference when I'm grouping them like this. What's relevant is the feeling between thumb and the other fingers as they work together, shifting, pressing down on the strings, and play with good intonation. Same with 3-finger positions. They're uncomfortable being an extended position, the so-called neck position. The same with positions played by 4 fingers. Let's start with the 4-finger positions. There are 8 of them. Demonstrating them quickly. They end with the E. The 3-finger positions begin with the F, where the thumb is not used yet, and the 4th finger is no longer used. G, G sharp, or A flat, according to which enharmonic name you use. The thumb positions from here on. They cover the whole fingerboard, all the way up, all the way down. There are a few exercises for the individual fingers to help them feel their specific position. For example, starting on the E and the A, playing a 5th, teach the individual fingers how they're supposed to function as single members in their specific position within the double stop. In fact, Janos Starker has written a very good exercise book for this purpose, an organized method of string playing for the left hand. I'd like to demonstrate a couple of double stops combinations from that book, quickly showing you how to practice and how it benefits you. This way you are not only developing the muscles of your hand, but you will gain a solid orientation for where you are. Here are examples of the basic positions. The first finger on 2 strings, then the first and second fingers, the 3rd finger, and the 4th. Then we go to the extended position, what the 3rd finger is doing. Here the 2nd finger is taking over, up to here. This is already a pretty big stretch for the hand. And now exercise within these positions like this. That was the first finger in combination with all the others. Now I'll use the first finger together with the second as my basic double stop and combine this 6th with the rest of the other fingers playing in 8th note patterns. This is already very uncomfortable. Notice how the thumb is coming up here to help the hand stretch. You have to use a whole lot of muscle strength, not at all comfortable, and there's no model for how it should look. In double stops, the finger just play like catch as catch can, adjusting somehow. You don't have to keep such and such a specific posture. Just pay attention to intonation and which fingers belong in which position. Here's the next double stop. Before the first finger was the bass finger. Now the bass fingers are the 2nd and the 1st. I'll combine the rest of the fingers with them. I just did the 3rd finger, here's the 4th, and the extended position. Done. The next basic placement are the 3rd and the 1st fingers. And we just continue adding all the rest of the fingers. We have still left the 4th finger, the 3rd as basic placement. Pay close attention to intonation. It's very important to keep it clean. For example, these are very narrow, and here you have to stretch far back. Ugh, that's not clean. Making correction is an important part of this exercise. The goal is not to play quickly. Just focus on the intonation and the feeling, including the feeling of discomfort and lots of muscle tension. Since the exercise inherently causes lots of tension, relax your forearm and your hand and don't overdo things. Otherwise, you might get tendonitis, so be sure to take little breaks from time to time. There's a little control exercise where you can vibrate again, as you have seen in those double stops we don't vibrate. Here vibrato is quite impossible anyway, and of course it's not necessary. This is just for muscle strength. The control exercises are totally different. The basic posture of your hand should be like that. Place your fingers on the string just the way they naturally fall without any manipulation. Violinists go like this. We transformed it to that. We can use both angles, but this posture serves as a better starting point. I'll address that in a bit more detail later. In this exercise, it is obligatory to place the fingers individually in their position and vibrate again, like this. And extended position. The second finger is in the air now, but because you just worked it out in the double stops, it is able to find its way back to its note easily. And the fourth finger, of course, also remember where its G sharp is. And so forth. Logically, you can play all the 8 notes I have just shown on the upper string, also on the next lower string. Your muscle strength will have improved too after having worked out all these positions. Naturally, do the same thing between A and D strings and between C and G strings. Then transpose the whole thing up chromatically by half steps, going through the rest of the 8 4-finger positions. All this will keep you busy for a while, but you shouldn't do too much at a time because you might get a bit sloppy after a while. It's about quality, not quantity. Building muscle strength doesn't happen in a day. The same principle is at work in the 3-finger positions. In the basic placement, again a fifth. The next finger is this one. The last one is this one, no finger left. The next bass fingers are the first and second. Also the extended position and so on and so forth, using the same pattern as in the 4-finger position exercises and later up here too. Or here, next basic placement. Naturally, each of the double stops in these positions should first be played as pure double stops held out in long notes before working them out in eighths. If the eighth note figures get too boring, just alter the rhythm, turning the eighths into this, with dotted rhythms or so when you want to, you can really busy yourself with them. What's important is to really absorb these muscle training and intonation exercises until you know and feel the positions where your hand is at home. In the thumb positions, there is something additional to realize. Not the first finger is forming the basic placement. The thumb over 2 strings is doing this. The thumb's muscles are developed right here in the ball of the thumb. Imagine that using the 4- and 3-finger positions is like moving on the mainland. Mainland for me feels sure-footed, with my feet on firm ground, feeling at home. Moving around in thumb positions, though, is always a bit wobbly, and I have a special expression for that too. But that'll come later. Movement on the mainland takes place approximately until here. Everything is up to that point clear and secure. Now to address the different functions of the fingers. I call the finger which plays the actual heard note, for example, here at the beginning of this Saint-Saëns concerto. Each note is played by 1 finger at a time. I call that finger the playing finger. The first finger is the playing finger of the E, the 4th of the D, etc. What about the other fingers? Whenever you have to travel to another spot, the playing finger might become the goal finger, or hand the next note over to the goal finger. Take the following as an example. Right here, the playing finger passes on to the goal finger the task of making the journey. At times, of course, the playing finger and the goal finger are one and the same. I will be using these terms playing finger and goal finger during my demonstrations and explanations throughout the 2 DVDs. Again, playing finger and goal finger. I have another special term for the area up here, where it's a bit more difficult, sometimes a lot more difficult to play. We just talked about playing on the mainland of the area down here. Up here, it's like moving on the open sea. My imagination brought this expression to my mind. So being out on the open sea, you easily lose your orientation. No horizon, no trees, no shrubs, or houses, or streets, or cars, or any kind of landmark to help you orientate. The North Star might help, but only if the sky isn't cloudy. You might be full of wonder, awestruck at the beautiful waters surrounding you on every side, but you're still suffering from a total lack of orientation, feeling insecure. On the open sea of the thumb positions, you might swim around with wonderful destinations in mind, yet not know how to get there. So the first thing to help you get your bearings is to find something to hold on to. One thing to help you orient on the open sea is to place the thumb over 2 strings instead of just one. Because first, it is in danger to fall off the string. We are dealing with the A string here. And second, it cannot feel the position it should establish together with the other fingers. For example, if I play the C with the thumb just on the A string, the only way to check and to hear whether it's clean is to take the third away. But then the interval distance is gone and I can tell if I have landed in the right place after traveling. Immediate control is not possible. But if I travel with my thumb on 2 strings, I can test whether or not my hand arrived safely at home. On purpose? Badly? Now I have landed. With my thumb over here, I check. Too flat, must be higher. Then the next time I slide, okay, I'm aim for the little farther up. Logically, since I have worked out the thumb positions, I can safely say my thumb feels at home here. So when playing in the thumb position, everything is a bit more wobbly. Make sure the thumb and the respective playing finger are solidly in place and feeling at home, with the distance between them, which should always be an octave between the thumb and the third. The thumb and the second finger always should be a 7th. The thumb first finger should always be the 6th. If I switch the 2 strings I'm playing, the octave becomes a 2nd. The second finger creates a 3rd. And the first builds a 4th. That's where the hand should be at home. Double stop exercises found within the Starker book help you internalize those intervals in your muscle memory by planting the notes on the fingerboard within their position. When we ascend up the fingerboard, at some point the distances start getting very small. Down here the octave placement is doable, but from here, around A, it's absolutely too narrow. You can't really place individual fingers well anymore. When playing passages that go up here, the thumb has to step back a bit to give the other fingers enough room to play. When they don't have room enough, they can't press the string down properly, and of course the sound will suffer. For example, if you have to play a passage such as the one in Elgar Concerto just before the fast part of the 4th movement, where it starts with the hair rising in a difficult upwards run, you'll need to open up the hand because it's in a loud dynamic and you need a powerful, brilliant sound. I'll demonstrate slowly. Thumb position. Here I begin on the mainland. Here I'm on the octave position. Here's the thumb on the F sharp. Oops, out of tune. Building the 6th and the octave again. The next note is the A up here. The interval should be a 6th now. But here's where it gets too narrow. The thumb has to step back. It has to open up, because if this peak note of the run is not comfortably placed by the fingers, of course it never will sound brilliant. The farther up the hand goes, the more it has to open up. Then there's enough room to play the final note. Through the double stops automatically results a feeling of balance on two strings when seen from the perspective of the thumb. Playing on the A string, of course, the thumb can be placed on either only on that string or on two strings. But if I only keep the thumb on the A string, I can't check the double stops.
If I do this,
I can't hear if the thumb's on the right place. If I bring it over, I can't play it. Nope, it has to be higher. So it's very advisable for the thumb to rest over two strings in its basic placement. Not just when practicing, always. Think of it like walking. You're balanced when you're standing with your 2 feet next to each other. And all of us walk like that. You don't move forward like this, one foot over top the other, like on a balance bar, then balance is missing. It works somehow, but it's not the most optimal way of walking. It's wobbly and you can fall over more easily. It's the same on two strings, as in normal life when you center your balance squarely between your feet. Gaining the sense of balance is quite important. When the thumb travels up here on the open C, a bit insecure, I love to think of it as an anchor. You can see how the thumb anchors the hand in place. It has to be able to float freely, like this, and be able to jump. It has to be able to both press and to hop. Sometimes it has to be ready to press down on only one string, sometimes on the other string. And there are also moments where it must press down on both at the same time. For example, Piazzolla's Le Grand Tango, you find this moment. Doing this requires a whole lot of pressure, so the whole fist has to help the thumb apply pressure. Here it really has to squeeze a lot, but in some places, like the Arpeggio Sonata, we find this, where the thumb floats along with, but also keeps the hand anchored in place. At its anchorage. It presses on the G. Note that the thumb is pressing here more on the A string where the playing finger is doing its work than on the D string. Once again. It floats along with, floating up and down. As for the other demands placed on the thumb, let's see also Arpeggio Sonata. You have to spring out of the pizzicato into this octave. So the thumb has to be able to hop into its anchorage knowing, aha, here's my B. How do I find it? Well, if you really get to know the geography of the fingerboard through the Stark exercises, at some point it'll become second nature to you. Of course, without muscles, no go, but they'll build up here over the course of time, like I promised before. And then there are also times where the thumb establishes only a very relaxed contact with the string, with harmonics and things like this. You actually just caress the string with your thumb without pressing down. So the thumb has to deal with all the different kinds of pressure and tactile sensations, travel at its various speeds over various distances as it leads the playing finger into the right position. If it gets stuck on the way, the playing finger and the gold fingers will be pretty unable to do their job, saying, goodbye orientation. The thumb consistently has to build a solid sort of bridge with the other fingers and give them a sense of a unit. It's extremely important. To sum up, the thumb has to know where its anchorages are. Sometimes it itself plays a note there, sometimes not, and sometimes it's just functioned as travel finger. Here comes the next term, the expression travel finger, talking about the finger that travels ahead to secure the place where a new finger has to play the next note. For example, Brahms' E minor sonata. So I have to get to the B flat. Before the shift, the first finger was the last one to play. It was the playing finger. The next note is supposed to be played by the third finger. So how do I get to B flat? The travel finger has to shift up into the position where the B flat feels at home. It's a three-finger position. And then it's easy for the playing finger to play its B flat safely. As soon the travel finger gets there, in that very moment, the playing finger must be ready to press down. His bed is made and the travel finger has to disappear. The first finger is only there to serve as a support while the hand travels. I take the bow off the string so the traveling is not heard. Now I have arrived. The next spot is the same as I go up to the C. The thumb is part of the preparation here too, also functioning as travel finger, moving along with the first finger so that when it lands on the D, the thumb is building a fourth with it on the G, as well as the octave. Here inaudibly traveling. And here's the third finger. The thumb and first only function as supports while traveling. All they have to do is help pressing the string down a bit and secure the anchorage so that the third finger easily falls into its place. The audience, of course, is not interested in your shifting activities or any of the tactile sensation on the fingerboard that I just explained. Only in this note and this note, but you must be interested. What do I mean when I use the word touch? The tactile sensations of the left hand on the fingerboard. We work with vertical movements like this, and with horizontal gliding fluid movements like the feeling of tenderly caressing the fingerboard. Touch is the artful combination of those two kinds of movement, and their degree of intensity and quality gives the music its magic, its character, its sound. I'll give you a few examples to clarify what I mean. Here is the analogy of strong coil springs, Schubert's Arpeggione Sonata. Iron nails in the Elgar Concerto, second movement. Now we have got the tiny elephant feet in the first movement of the Elgar. Soft velvet pause in Schubert's Arpeggione Sonata, first movement. Drumming raindrops, Beethoven A major, last movement. Giving a strong, firm massage, Schumann, 5 Stücke im Volkston. Third one. Caressing the string, Schubert, Arpeggione, first movement. Lightly falling snowflakes, Shostakovich Sonata, Scherzo. Popcorn. What do I mean by popcorn? Isn't it something to eat and not to play in the cello? Actually, in some passages we really do have to jump off the fingerboard, and then we usually are pretty insecure if the fingers will land on the right notes, and that way they feel like popcorn hopping randomly out of the pan. But of course, in those places your fingers shouldn't hop around like popcorn and land just anywhere. For example, the Schumann Concerto, third movement, we have a typical place. Everybody knows that beginning. Here, that jump, it's like hopping popcorn. But of course the aim has to be hit solidly here. Popcorn in mind might help you to have fun while practicing. The next passage is as sticky as honey, the fingers are all stuck together. For example, in the Rococo variations, fourth variations, there is this scale. As gooey as honey, it sounds like this. The fingers refuse to come apart, whether because of fear or muscle weakness or whatever. There are so many reasons. That's not allowing gooiness. Slipping on a banana peel, what does that mean? It means slipping on not knowing where I'm going to end up. like that. If I have a big slide, naturally I want to reach my goal. For example, again, Rococo variations, the spot before the first variation, here it is. Not slipping, arriving on the C sharp is fun. The angle to the string is a very important matter for us cellists. For violin players, there is only one angle to this string. They can't play it any differently, but cellists can choose this angle or that one, with the wrist and the knuckles turning like this or like this. That means the index finger's ball and socket joint bends all the way, bringing the rest of the fingers closer to the string. But if you work with children just beginning to play the cello, you should teach that 90-degree angle, because that way the little finger can be placed better. If you use this position, you already would have to stretch with this finger. That's too hard on kids. Of course, later, stretching can't be avoided, so we must be able to switch back and forth between this angle and that angle. Your left hand needs to have this flexibility. The index finger knuckle, this one, especially is there to bring the other fingers closer to the places they have to play. Of course, that must happen between the notes, not while playing a note. That way, a note never should be played. So here the first finger bends its knuckle as much as possible, brings the third finger closer to its placement and releases. This also gives your fingers a good chance to change quickly. The bow has to hide this process skillfully. Tapering off the note, letting the two fingers do their job. Here they change, then the next note. First finger definitely should be released. If the knuckle doesn't bend, the hand will stiffen up in the position, making it hard to correct the intonation and keeping the hand facing the wrong direction to facilitate shifts like this instead of like this. So it's vital for the index finger to use the flexibility of its ball and socket joint. Of course, using it with ease needs a good deal of practice. Compared to the fingerboard, the whole apparatus of the hand looks like an arching bridge. In the upper positions in the open C, the fingers build more of an arch throughout the hand, while they are flattening more here in the lower positions. This arching bridge itself has to be able to move very flexibly, pushing up and down. It requires stability, flexibility and strength from all finger joints as well as from the saddle joint, which is the thumb's base joint. All of the joints are at your disposal, and just being conscious about them will help you. Now a few words about the first joints of your fingers. You can use them curved, like this, or you can flatten them straight. We use them within their boundaries from here to there. The sound is different. Curved sounds like this. Flattened sounds like this with more flesh on the string. No matter what specific character you're after, no matter whether you want to move quickly on the fingerboard or you are reaching for a beautiful, rich and full sound on a long tone, you have to decide how to use your joints. Of course, you have to train them quite a bit. By nature, in a relaxed state, wherever parts of your body meet, they are connected by joints which are curved. No wrist is inherently shaped like this. No first joints are natural shaped like this, only when being manipulated. So if you use your joints in the way nature has made them, that's the most natural, healthy and physiologically sensible road to follow. But of course, when we play, we often have to manipulate the fingers, because otherwise we won't be able to turn certain sound characters from brilliant to magic. The bow actually is responsible for sound, but the left hand helps and also takes care of moving forward skillfully. For that we need curved joints down here as well up here. Usually only your first finger has to be taken care of, which tends to collapse, like this, when it doesn't have enough strength and hinders the forward motion. Here's an example, Elgar concerto. If I play the whole run with a flattened first joint of the index finger, the other fingers too can't function as freely because the first finger is bitten down on the fingerboard and a negative train reaction is resulting from this. That's very important to be aware of. But in double stops, such as the ones in the last movement of the Brahms double concerto, if you need a powerful sound with a lot of guts, of course your first finger must be flattened or you will have a thin sound. Or half steps between the thumb and first finger, and you demand it to remain curved, then it will slip off. No good. we better use a flattened joint. Schumann Concerto, first movement. In this line, the finger has to bend, or else it will slip off and miss the note. Since you can't press the string down from the side, only from above, you have to stretch back and then place the first finger really very quickly. But first feel the contact to that string, then place it, then press it down, immediately change to next finger. Muscle strength is required. You might have already read in my book, The First Quintessence, about what I like to call the corset. You might be asking what it could possibly have to do with playing the cello. I use the word to refer to the situation our fingers sometimes face when they're placed very close together but still have to function well. It shouldn't sound like a corset, but it definitely feels like one. We have to be able to deal with it. We're all familiar with the passage in Saint-Saëns' concerto that has these fifths. Here's one of those. The next one's here. The fingers are so narrow, almost on top of each other. It's uncomfortable. But still, it has to sound good. Comes the next corset. And the next. And here the hand has to open up again. Even though it's so unpleasant for the fingers, we still have to manage. In the contrary, we have situations requiring us to really stretch. In those cases, I like to say that the hand is in traction. For example, down here. You have to get the octave. It's extremely difficult for the hand, especially if you have to suddenly jump somewhere else and play a beautiful line. It's hard to come quickly out of the stretch and immediately find the tactile sensation of a normal position. When we look at the natural movements of walking, we can partially transfer the same principles into our finger actions. When we walk, we have one foot down and the other one up. From there, the one foot goes down while the other one comes up in the back, passing the planted foot, and the motion continues like a rolling motion. And even when you are walking backwards, it's the same. One up, one down, alternating. Otherwise, we'd be shuffling around like this, which we shouldn't. But on the fingerboard, we also have other principles at work, where we have to move like this. When we play a quick run with the first finger always shifting, of course, it stays down on the fingerboard. So the other one on top has to give really good impulses up into the air to make room for the forward motion of the shifting finger not get in its way. An example, second movement, Elgar Concerto. The first finger always remains on the string. It doesn't ever leave it. The finger playing the next note has to be lifted with each shift. Or Haydn. All that is like a limping motion. The finger that's shifting, which is always the second in this case, of course remains down while shifting, but has to be lifted up with impulse after the shift to make room for the neighboring first and third fingers. Otherwise, the fingers won't be able to articulate clearly. So the natural walking sort of movement, one finger down while the other one is up like this, isn't always possible. So it's important for us to learn when to use what. There is no fixed rule. We just have to learn how to deal with the various elements. Every passage is different and asks for individual decisions. It's very necessary to recognize the right moment to let all the fingers rest on the string, or place all the fingers at the same moment, or place only one finger down, or release only one finger from the string. If I play a G, sorry, that's scratched, I can play it like this, or like this, or like that, or like this. Acoustically, it remains the same G, but the feeling the hand will have once it moves forward from there is totally different. Also like this, or like this. Lifting up this finger is very uncomfortable and forces the muscles to carry a lot of tension, but maybe I have to be somewhere else very quickly, so it's better to lift up, so that I'm ready to move on. What you have to do with your fingers is totally dependent on the music you play. Another important thing to learn is the use of impulses as you place your fingers. Either when you come out of the air down into the string, or when you kick off the string into the air. The playing finger should provide these impulses. If I know I will play the next note with the fourth finger, then I should prepare it and tell, hey, you're next. And then follows a nice little hammer. If the second finger has to play the next note, then I should provide it with an impulse into the air, tell it, now it's your turn. If the first finger plays next, it should come down with an impulse at the same time as you give the second an upwards impulse. Giving impulses into the air and down onto the string with extra energy is quite vital. Also, the pressure distribution of the individual fingers should be on the list of your menu. If 4 fingers are resting on the string, that doesn't mean they all have to use the same amount of pressure. For example, Saint-Saëns concerto. Once I have placed the fingers, they remain resting on the string. I can feel where I'm applying pressure and where I'm not. From just watching you can't tell, but now I'm pressing down only with the 4th finger when I get to the end of the 4 notes. These fingers are totally relaxed. They remain resting on the string because they'll have to play soon. This is an important concept in quick and especially legato passages where you better guide your fingers well so you always have control of their activities. Playing with those 3 fingers, you can see that I press more with the 3rd finger now because it gets whiter around the edges. Of course, it is impossible to demonstrate these tactile sensations, but in your next practice sessions, go for finding these sensations. They really do count at the end. So when a finger plays an actually heard note, it has to press down, but once it's done, it has to pass its strength on to the next finger. Just because a finger is resting on the string doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't have enough strength to lift up. It's because the finger has to be able to be used again quickly. This is a wide-ranging issue, and in my book I explain the basic principles with the use of quite a lot of examples from our repertoire. I have worked out all the details in the way I think is most helpful. Of course, you may decide differently. Vital is that you understand that making decisions should become an indispensable component in your practice. It's almost impossible to talk about vibrato. You have to feel vibrato in order to create it. Vibrato reflects the very soul of a player, and everyone has a different tone ideal that flowers into a very individual vibrato. It is something very mysterious. In my 30 years of teaching, I have learned that almost everybody keeps his basic vibrato learned in the early years of playing. You can alter it a bit, tweak it at the end, practice it somehow a bit, but actually everyone has an inherently individual vibrato that stays with them a lifetime. That's a wonderful thing because there are so many different kinds of musical ideals and individuals have all sorts of different tastes and emotions. But there are a few fundamental ideas for us to quickly explore. The best vibrato is one generated from the unit of form and hand. They should feel as oneness, without the hand separate from the forearm. This unit we need to move both up and down without breaking the line, and like this it supports the shifting technique. Everything moves in the same direction. That's better than using the rotation vibrato, in which the wrist rotates around the spot. Intonation isn't very clean like this. Intonation gets too sharp or too flat and the finger is really only rotating around the center of the note. Plus, if my hand is facing this direction in the moment I want to shift up, I'm moving in the wrong direction. That's a problem. It means the vibrato stops while the finger is rolling back, and only then you can go on. Shifting back down is the same. That's why it's better to create vibrato from the unit of form and hand. How can you find the feeling? I suggest to take the G as the center and go from here to here, sliding back and forth and not using any pressure so the motion can be done quickly. Then bring the boundaries of the movement closer and closer to each other, using progressively more pressure. Then stay on the G, anchoring your finger firmly and keeping the feeling of its unity between hand and forearm. Bow changes should always be slower, however. If you move quickly with the left hand, the bow shouldn't just follow along with it. It should remain completely unaffected. It should end in a very calm motion on one note. Once again. Of course, you can use whatever note you like. Use it as the center of the movement, starting with big motions, getting smaller and smaller. Do this with every finger in every position in order to develop a consistent tone for all the fingers. Let's analyze one unit of vibrato now. Rotation vibrato, as I said, just rotates around the note. When we use the oneness of the form and hand, we can feel that the cell of every vibrato movement is a unit of an impulse and a reflexive motion. The impulse is like this, and then the reflex comes back, just like this. I give an impulse and the reflex comes back by itself. The impulse just has to be strong enough. Vibrato is made up of many of those two-phased units. When you're learning how to control this sequence of reflexive reaction and proactive impulse, you can explore them on any surface. And forget about rotating with the arm. It's primarily the finger which should give the impulse and feel the reflex. You can clearly hear it. The tone gets a bit higher with the impulse and lowers back to the center. You may practice this on the back of your hand because the skin moves around easily. Push the flash and the reflex lets the skin move back by itself. If you roll around, nothing happens with the skin. Instead, you feel coming and going. Enjoy this tactile sensation on your own skin, which feels nice and warm. Here's the impulse, muscle exertion that takes some strength, and then the reflex, which makes everything relax once again. In order to bring it up to tempo and master various vibrato speeds as well as learn to control the connection from one vibrated tone to the next one, you can do some special exercises. For example, I take a basic beat and play one vibrato unit. Then 2 units within a basic beat. Attention, if I decide to use 2, I really have to stop in the reflexive motion. Stop. Now I'll play 3. Now I'll play 4. Now I play 6, 2 times 3. And avoid to wobble on. I often see that when students try to do this exercise after playing 6, they wobble on, only sometimes come to a standstill. That's exactly what has to be avoided. So no further movement after 6 times. And remember, you never should stop it while you're applying pressure. Only in the reflexive motion. 8, 2 times 4. Stop. Now I'll do 9, 3 times 3. You see, by taking the same basic beat, this exercise makes the vibrato quicker and quicker. 12, 3 times 4. You can use the exercise until you reach 16 or go even further, depending on what you're after. Do it with every finger on the same spot in the thumb positions as well. Then you'll learn how to control your vibrato and also be able to stop it. So controlling the reflex movement at the end of a note gives you the possibility to continue with a proactive impulse or to stop. Moving on to the next note, though, you might have noticed that the vibrato sometimes stops all by itself and you don't continue well. As we place the fingers, there are vertical movements that have to be coordinated with horizontal movements. A bad coordination causes the unwanted stop of the vibrato, like this. Stopping before placing the next fingers and starting from scratch. No, it has to continue. I'll end with a reflexive reaction motion, and while planting the next finger, the vibrato keeps on going into the next impulse. This is the difficult moment, coordinating the horizontal and vertical planes of motion. Could you tell that there were 8 vibrato impulses per note? It's the same, back down. 5, 6, 7, 8, reflex impulse. Reflex impulse. The alternating fingers really have to be coordinated perfectly. If shifts occur in between, of course, it's even more tricky. But that's just what seamless vibrato is supposed to do, not stop when the fingers are changing or when a shift occurs. It's very important. Same thing applies to the thumb. If you're one of the people who say the thumb can't vibrate, get rid of that thought. See, it can vibrate. Just believe and do it. It may not be as good as with the other fingers, but you shouldn't dismiss it completely. Now, bow changes have to be integrated into these vibrato units as well. At the moment of the bow change, vibrato shouldn't stop. Wait for the bow change and then continue. That happens quite often. But at the corners and ends where you're trying to coordinate several kinds of motions, you shouldn't just stop. So how does the bow integrate? Not just whenever and anywhere, but exactly when you get to the proactive impulse. I'll do it 4 times, so listen carefully. Now I'll do 8. You can create a long tone in such a way that the bow change is barely able to be heard if you coordinate all the details in the right moment. So you have to know, pay close attention, be alert and quick on your feet. Carefully develop your left hand reflexes and finger memory as well as the skills to integrate the bow. Trilling also brings with it problems unique to each player. One might say, I can only trill quickly, while the other might say, I can only trill slowly. The next might say, I can't trill at all, and the next, at the end of my trill, I always start floundering around and get stuck. What to make of this? It's like vibrato. Motor skills are inborn, and every player has unique tendencies towards slow or fast trills. But you still have to be able to play them at any speed. If your trill is too slow, you have to learn how to trill more quickly and vice versa. So your task is to work on your weak sides and improve the opposite of your natural tendencies. A trill is created by coordinating static stability and dynamic movement. The fingers playing the bottom note of a trill is static and doesn't move from its spot, so it has nothing to do with character or tempo or anything. It just sits there while the other finger does all the trilling work. If it becomes stiff in the meantime and can't pull away at the end, the other finger feels that and can't help to adjust. Then both fingers end up stuck on the string. So it's vitally important for the bass finger of the trill to learn to unlock the handcuffs. The right moment for that is when the trilling finger comes down for the last time. Now, right here. So you don't unlock the handcuffs with a falling motion, but with a lifting motion. Everyone seems to think the trill naturally goes from top to bottom. You tend to notice the upper note more, which is made heard by its falling motion. However, it's extremely helpful for you to pay attention to the lifting motion involved, because that's what ends the trill. This is the last moment of the trill, so at this point the finger playing the bottom note should come up. The trilling finger lifts up for the last drop down. This one comes up, otherwise it gets stuck on the string. It's a pretty important thing. Every trill, whether it has an afterbeat or not, whether it has 2 afterbeat notes or just 1, whether the afterbeat goes up or down, or whether it's played with an open string, it's always finished with the lifting motion. Here's a well-known trill, Sarabande Bach D minor suite. I hear it played a lot like this instead. Make sure to lift your finger and take over the speed of the trilling finger. If you don't, there will be a hole. A trill can also end leading into vibrato. In that case, the bass finger doesn't lift up yet, even though it will later on, or it just stays down as long as I want. Schumann concerto stays down. However, as you can see, the trilling finger lifts up at the end. The trilling finger isn't down but up. Now the finger can shift. It's the bass finger and still has to keep pressing, but now it must lift up. If you don't anticipate this moment, it will have bitten down on the string and be unable to release in time. So it has to know, leave now. Coordinating all of this takes working very slowly, and you always should execute this lifting motion very consciously. Of course, be aware that it's a lot more uncomfortable with the third finger than with the other fingers. The same principle is at work with the thumb, which is like an open string. The finger with the bottom note, the first finger, has to make room for the thumb, which doesn't give an impulse from here. It's already down on the string, which means the bass finger of the trill has to lift up all the more. I'd also like to mention some trills that are a bit of a fake. I call them vibrato trills. To execute them, tense up the upper arm and the trilling finger, the fourth in the case. Bring it close to the string and just wiggle the upper arm as strongly as possible. Your shaking brings the finger in contact with the string, like that. can use that kind of trill best when it has to be very short and crisp sounding. To sum up, the key to trilling rests in combining static stability and dynamic movements, and the lifting movement at the end of a trill is absolutely vital. For us string players, an interval means mastering its pitch through finger placement. For example, for this 6, it's a finger placement within the position and thus easy to reach. The same interval like this sounds the same, but using the first and fourth fingers on the same string, I'm getting the second note in a total different way. 1, 4. With 1, 3, it's a different again. Different again. And different once more. I could also play that way. It's the same interval in pitch, but we constantly have to deal with different finger placements. Try to find the easiest ones without making it easy at the expense of the music. Of course, executing finger placements within the changing position sizes accurately and confidently is the goal we are all after. And from my own playing experience as well as from my teaching experience, I know that hearing intervals in the inner ear before playing them gives us the best chance of success. It gives us an idea of the pitch beforehand of where the finger is supposed to land. If you don't have a clue how a 7th or an augmented 4th sounds, you'll need too much time for stupid repetition in your practicing time. And the result will be much more solid with hearing the interval first. For example, if I play an E and I have to play an augmented 4th up, how does it sound? Anticipate in your inner ear, then sing it out loudly before playing it. How can you find it if you don't know? Simply think of a perfect 4th like the beginning of the Schumann concerto and then go up a half step. La 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 la. Go up half step. Da da da. So if you send your fingers up there and already have the note in your ear that you are aiming for, you can do a better job of fixing the intonation if the rival was out of tune. If you happen to land here, your finger immediately knows in what direction to correct. If you don't hear it ahead of time, the finger will stumble around to find the right spot, audible for everyone. Of course, a piano could help with the pitch, also when you're playing traditional harmonies, but when it comes to playing contemporary music, it's something totally different. Singers especially have a hard time there. They have nothing guiding them, no open strings, or harmonics providing a quick point of orientation. Intervals down are more difficult than intervals up. The skill of anticipated hearing makes a big difference. Let's apply it to an example. G with first finger here. And in front of you, above the G, it's a D sharp to be played by the third finger. How does G, D sharp sound? Sing the D sharp an octave lower. Is a minor 6th if you look at it inharmonically. If you keep that second note in your inner ear, turn up an octave, the finger stands a better chance of making it up there, and then you can fix the intonation faster because you're able to react when it's not quite right. So you see the importance of the anticipated hearing. Let's take B, D flat, down, D flat. How does B, D flat sound? What in the world is that interval? What should we do? It's easiest to imagine B, C sharp. C sharp is the same as D flat. It's possible to imagine B, D flat. Okay, so now I can hear it ahead of time, but that still doesn't guarantee that I'll hit the mark with reliable security, which means I have to learn the best way of covering that distance. Right now, I just know how it should sound in the end. That's the first hurdle. The next is, how do I get from one place to the other? This brings me to my concept of topographic intervals. This special term, topographic intervals, is based on the Greek word topos, which means place. A topographic interval is only there for orientation and placement, not audible. Here an example from E to C. The finger that played the old note has to prepare the new position, stopping in exactly the right place so the fourth finger can easily come down in its new place. Of course, you have to know the general intervallic distance between the first and fourth finger. If you have done the wonderful Starker position exercise, your finger already know their intervallic relationships. The first finger knows that it has to travel here in order to prepare the new home for the fourth finger. So the topographic interval is the fourth. If I've got that, the fourth finger will have no problem just to fall into his bed. When practicing the topographic intervals, however, you should play them out loud in order to hear if your fingers actually have landed in the right spot. If I don't get the note and instead arrive there, it's wrong. The topographic interval is the first thing to master. The audible intervals build on the foundation of this and highly depending on its quality. So practice first. The finger change between the sliding finger or travel finger and the gold finger takes place when you arrive in the new position. In the moment when the gold finger is placed, the travel finger's job is done and can disappear. Has nothing more to do. Now let's take the previous example, the interval from G to D sharp, where we go into thumb position. How do I find the D sharp? The thumb has to travel there as well. Which intervallic distance does it form with the travel finger? When I play the D sharp, I know it builds an augmented octave with the thumb. Sounds like that. Once you know how an octave sounds, you can figure it out from there. Now the first finger goes on its journey. The thumb has to come along as well, and it has to know which intervallic distance to form with the traveling finger when arriving at this place. Here, they always have to form a fourth. We have learned that in the geography of the fingerboard. This interval represents a typical topographic upon arrival interval, meaning that it has to be formed at arrival, but won't be heard. Now, the third finger knows it has to stretch to reach the augmented octave. In this moment, the first finger's job is done and can disappear. It has arrived, then leaves. Now the thumb builds an augmented octave for the third finger. Once they enter this interval, they know and feel that's our home at the moment. You hear at the end only this note, but the thumb stays on its place for orientation and support. So we have to form 5 inaudible intervals. I play them audible first. That's the first one. It's an octave, as you can hear. That's the first topographic interval. The next is the fourth. The next is a checkup of the 7th, 1, 3 within the octave position. Then you go up half step to end up with this. Let go of this interval, the augmented 7 with the first finger. What's left over is this very last topographic interval. Now I'll execute all the steps silently. Of course, the bow has to disappear while I'm doing all of this. Go up an octave, find the fourth, find this, let go of first finger. D sharp's left over. Those are the steps for shooting on target. Of course, that was a more difficult example, but as soon as the thumb comes into the picture, as we sail out onto the high seas, you have to feel these intervals in the hand, or you'll never be able to hit the notes dependently. If you use this method, you can find any place you want. You just have to figure out how far you have to go and which interval the sliding finger has to form with the thumb. By the time the note is actually presented to the audience, the finger will be bulletproofed from all that preparation, and it's ready for stunning and totally free sound protection. Here the bow comes into picture and then can show off the note. Everything will be right as rain. And remember, the bow has to taper off before you start every journey in the end. But before, you must play all the topographic intervals out loud to secure the travel distances. Then slowly reduce the audibility with less bow pressure. Nice and clear at first, then a bit less, and finally there is so little bow pressure left that you don't hear the shifting anymore. Just always make sure you have got the right interval with the thumb. It's one of the most important issues when you shoot on target. And if you don't anticipate the gold tone in your inner ear, all of the detailed steps how to get there have no base to go from. The term audible interval, of course, here means the 2 notes are heard at start and arrival of every shift. Successful execution always is built on the quality of the preparing topographic interval. And exactly this is one extraordinary thing about topographic intervals. Their travel distances mostly are totally different than the pitch. I'll take an example from the Haydn C major concerto. There's a well-known scale at the end of the first solo. From G to G with this fingering. With another one, everything changes. Now watch this fingering. What do you hear? A fifth. But the travel distance needed to get there is far from a fifth. Instead, the note played at first has to prepare the new position. And where does it have to go? right there to the C. If these two have learned to keep their octave position while traveling, yes, then I'm on my place. As you see, the topographic journey covers not a fifth, but just a second. So the spot isn't so difficult after all. Students often look at me like a deer in headlights. Say, what? Hit the fifth down with my thumb? I'll never be able to do it. But it's not a fifth. The audible interval is one, but the journey is much smaller. What a relief. The thumb is here and goes there. If the thumb is in the air, though, and you haven't learned how to place it correctly, then of course it'll be hard to hit the note. This fingering never would work out. What a discovery, the thumb as a help instead of being a bother. Another example, Brahms' E minor. Going from G to B, often this B is flat, ugly. Everyone thinks, ah damn, higher. Why does that always happen? So when the G is played with the third finger and the B with the second, you hear a third. But if you want to play the B with the second finger and it's sitting here, right next to the third, on this F sharp, then the journey won't span a third but a fourth, farther than what it seems. So the reason the B so often comes out flat is because unawareness that the travel interval is larger than the audible interval. Now, if I play the G with the fourth finger, it's wider still. If I lift up the fourth finger, you can see that the second finger is on F. F to B is an augmented fourth. The B is further away. So I prefer to use the third finger already placed in right angle for the second finger's shift, as well as offering the shortest way. So starting with the third, the perfect fourth, easier then. Sometimes intonation comes out too flat or too sharp simply because you don't understand how to plot your best travel schedule. It's all a bit more complicated in thumb positions, but you can see that familiarity with these concepts in the lower positions is just as vitally important. What you hear doesn't necessarily tell what you have to do. Shifts are one of the most difficult matters for any string player, including the viola players, the double bass players, the viola da gamba players, the violin players. We all have to master all kinds of shifts. Mostly we don't want them even to be heard, only to create special colors or certain moods of emotion or express a specific stylistic character. And we hate shuffling sounds because of laziness or bad coordination, so we have to learn the skills of shifting silently. How to find notes accurately is addressed in the part on topographic intervals, and now we have to address how to coordinate the bow with them. The timing of the bow makes the journey between the notes either audible or inaudible. Perfect timing is essential. I call a shift that shouldn't be heard the anticipated shift. You anticipate the new beat, stealing a bit of time from the old beat in order to travel to the next place, arriving there exactly on the beat. Allow me to demonstrate. This is a shift that isn't meant to be expressive and therefore shouldn't be audible. I'll start the metronome. You'll hear me depart on the first beat and arrive on the next, having already prepared the position for the next finger. Look closely, the movement doesn't stop, it always keeps on going. And you don't hear anything. That means you have to decide which finger to depart with and start sliding, and which finger will arrive. And then always keeping the same bow speed. Release the bow pressure. Same bow speed. Without pressure. That will also give the left hand a consistent speed so it doesn't jerk, slowly starting and then suddenly hurrying. Then you lose control. Something like dai thumb. Here is the rule of the thumb for the anticipated shift. The old finger shifts on the old bow. The old finger, which had played the old note, travels on the old bow to its predetermined position. Then the new bow plays the new finger. So the tracks are set up at departure, the old finger on the old bow. The other shift, the delayed shift, I call delayed because its arrival is late. It conveys to the listener a sense of expressiveness. It's rhythmically delayed because it actually arrives after the beat. You depart right on the beat when the bow changes.
But you haven't reached yet the new note.
I'll demonstrate with the same two notes and the same two fingers. I'm not there yet. That's what leads to expressiveness. I just showed the timing, which wasn't particularly expressive, so now without the tick-tock. Only the bow makes the slide audible. Now this shift isn't audible because I'm just carelessly shuffling along with my fingers and being sloppy with my bow, but because I meant it to be audible to a certain degree. Now I'll use two different fingers. I start sliding on the beat and arrive late. The rule of the thumb, the new finger slides on the new bow. New finger means the finger that plays the next note. If I plan to play the C with the second finger, it has to slide together with a new bow. Depending on how strongly you press with your bow, it changes from to or. You can do anything from gorgeous to tasteless, as you like according to your taste and skills or what you think the character of a particular spot should express. The degree of intensity is very individual compared to the other shift. Just make sure to know what you want. That's the only fact. Of course, you can mix the two basic shifts. They both are as important to us as day and night, light and dark. But there are so many shades of dawn and twilight, sunshine and haze, so the mixtures of all colors in your shifts are what makes exquisite playing. So combine them and vary them. For example, in one variant on the anticipated shift, it's not the old finger traveling on the old bow, but instead the new finger on the old bow. I want to go from this note to there. The new finger departs on the old bow. If I want to make the departure more audible, I should press down a little, release later at the end, arrive, oops, that was out of tune, arrive without hearing any of the traveling. That makes the departure sound more expressive. Now I'll do it the other way around, using bow pressure at the end of the journey, but still beginning with the new finger. Release the bow pressure, emphasizing just the last bit. Here's the other one again. According to whether you want the beginning to be more expressive or the end. So choose which delicate hue you want to use, referring to what you wish to express. Find the timing plus the degree of intensity that will bring out the exact shades. Instead of a pure anticipated shift, departing with the old finger and land with a new, with no bow pressure, I can make it a bit audible by pressing down just a bit at the beginning, but then taper off. Then at the end, clearly hit the note on the spot. Then, again, the departure is a bit expressive, extremely subtle. And now for the combinations of the anticipated and delayed shifts. Probably used best only with very large distances, where pure delayed shifts would sound a bit too juicy. You can find one in Brahms' F major sonata first movement. The shift to the D. If I play a complete delayed shift in forte dynamic, it's too dominant for my tastes, since the D is not the ending. The line's intensity leads to the G, and if the D turns out too juicy, the G follows with the sound getting too thin or brutal, wrong musical balance. So with such a big shift, I find it more advisable to use a combination. I depart as if making an anticipated shift, so it will be unaudible, and just at the very end I turn it into an expressive shift. I depart inaudibly, but at the end I don't want to dry. So I'm departing and change to up bow shortly before arrival, and the end gives an illusion of a delayed shift. Departure anticipated, arrival delayed. You build phrases like this, creating tension and relaxation. Use the mixture of all these different kinds of shifts as the key to expressiveness. There is great freedom of choice according to your innate musical senses and your musical education, the education you undergo for learning more about music in general. Except the score, there aren't any solid rules. As for practicing geographically, how do we address the subject to the left hand? I have discussed the geography of the fingerboard at the beginning of the main menu left-hand technique, and when I say geographical practicing, I mean practicing passages that have difficult shifts or finger placements, or even difficulties the whole way through a passage, transposed over the entire fingerboard. Think about where you have problems with stretching. For example, from G sharp to C sharp. For my hand, it's a big distance. For others, it might be not, though for them possibly between G and C. Make the stretch even more difficult by transposing down half step. Always backwards and forwards. After going backwards, you should go up forwards again. Then when you come back to the original spot, it doesn't seem so difficult anymore. But focus on a nice tone too, and don't do it as quickly as I just did. It should sound good and have vibrato. Good quality of sound. You also have to know which notes you're playing. You might know the notes nearby, but then begin to swim around a bit. You have to know from this F, you plan to go up a fourth to B flat. Okay. To help the fingers even more to remember it, just stay there with two fingers. Let them just sit there for a while. They'll get used to the discomfort. These notes form the boundaries, and later the finger will be able to fall out of the air into place easily. And without the help of the second finger, let the two work on their own. It can be done very softly. The bow is involved only to check intonation. Your neighbors will be happy about the peace and quiet in between. Then you'll come back to the original stretch only to find, hey, that's really not so far. Do this exercise a lot, but never without taking little breaks because it's so taxing. However, the aim is to make things harder. Here's a whole passage that's difficult. We're all familiar with the spot in Haydn Concerto, third movement. After this, there are no shifts involved, just playing in the same position. Your knuckles must be very flexible here, otherwise you can't place the first finger with the necessary contact, but then back to its normal arched shape, since you can't go on like this. In this placement, the first finger can only slightly touch the string before pushing up back to normal. To get the next placement, same for G sharp to B. That's the difficulty with this spot. You have to feel out the notes with the very tip of your first finger before the third finger can give up the interval to the first finger. This takes over and goes back to normal. Don't stay like this. You would be blocked to continue. Quickly find the right amount of pressure, then click back into place, into the basic shape. Not like this. You can master all this by practicing geographically. Let me transpose the passage down a half step. The larger distances make the passage much harder. C major. Up again. You can play it chromatically up and down the fingerboard as well as within the passage. How about in B flat major? With the distances getting larger, it's more difficult, especially with the fourth. It's very unusual to have this distance between thumb and first finger. We are used to play a second with them, so hitting a fourth securely is hard. And the muscles in the ball of the thumb have to have so much strength that the bass joint doesn't collapse when stretching on top of it. Of course, the risk of everything sagging is greater with stretching. Fingers close to each other give you a better leverage to operate with. This is a lot more unnatural and also complicates the finger placement. But working out these problems consistently will strengthen every muscle and result in great flexibility. So, geographical and physiological practicing means to work through passages over the entire fingerboard. It helps you with huge stretches In the B-flat major trio by Schubert, what a beautiful passage. Maybe you can't stretch this far, but it just doesn't sound good in thumb position. So you have to master the stretch by making it more difficult. And then, like I said, let your fingers just sit there like in traction. Bear it for a while and then go on. Take the bow off only once it's clean. Now I can let go. The fingers will feel familiar with the stretches through this kind of training. Once you release the string, immediately let your fingers relax. See, this finger remains in the stretch for a second. It's so used to it. But it will let go. Relax forearm, wrist. How to relax is one of the biggest questions and difficulties for cellists. You might think you don't have time to relax in a quick tempo, but you always can find some time, and there are lots of specific places you can relax. For example, with shifts. Whenever you're traveling over the fingerboard, you can relax. The only question is, how much? 100%? 50%? 70%? 3%? It's important to learn to gauge how much, because you can't always completely relax. It's like breathing. If I want to complete a long sentence, I naturally take a deep breath, having ready in my mind all the many things I want to say. If I only want to say 2 words, I know, I only take a shallow, short breath. Relaxing is the same. We have short moments to release pressure as well as long moments. You just have to track them down and then find out what to do. The question is, where exactly? On a note? Or between 2 notes? On a note, there never is the slightest chance. If you are producing sound, as long as the bow is playing as strongly as this, there is no possible moment for you to relax. But once you're finished playing 4 notes, you can say, okay, now. This happens. The solid unit of the forearm and hand is dissolved by letting the tension melt from your forearm as the wrist tips down. Here you feel complete relaxation. Of course, you can't go on playing like this. So before you play the next note, you have to wake up the muscles again, know which finger is playing next, here or there, aware that it's time to exert energy again. When you are jumping to the next note, again break up the line. With the arm relaxed, travel to your next note, unify forearm and hand again and press down. Of course, for the big movement I took up a whole lot of time, but in order to be able to relax just a tiny bit, first you have to know how 100% relaxation feels, and then you'll be able to gauge smaller amounts of relaxation. Back to the keyword, moments of relaxation. Where are more? We have already found some in between notes. You can find more of these on open strings and harmonics, or obviously during rests. Rests are such a basic place to relax, so take note of those places when you look at the music and use them whether you feel like you need them or not. Cello playing demands so much exertion that you will thank yourself if you take every chance to relax, even if your fingers don't feel they need to at first. You'll be able to play much longer with real quality and endure a whole lot more. Don't just wait until you get so tense or tired that you have trouble to continue. Search out every little moment. There are a lot more than you might dream of, and naturally you can find them best by figuring out your music note by note. Open strings, harmonics, rests, and of course shifts, especially when together with a bow change. If there is no bow change, you can't relax 100%, only a bit. When the bow takes some pressure off the string, this is also the moment for the left hand to relax. What makes it harder here is not allowing any break in the sound. As I demonstrate, you hear a break. That's what we don't want. Or the same with the bow changes. There shouldn't be a gap in the sound. It should go on seamlessly. Watch, the wrist arches, releases, and the hand is placed in the new position. Of course, now I can't avoid a break there because of the slow demonstration. Quickly. It's so important to learn how to deal with these things. For example, even if you just have a finger exchange on the same note, That's another tiny place for you to relax, which you might not have noticed at all. You see, I'm not doing this, but this. I let go of the tension only after the bow has left the string first. Then the movement of the left hand can't be heard. The string comes up as I release a bit of the pressure with my finger. I let my relaxed wrist take over the motion, leave the string, and then use the next finger to play the same note. I just jump to it, but I can also glide on the string just as well. It's time for the bow to return once the finger is pressed down again. Here. The bow can come in again. So the bow is the first to leave and the last to arrive. In the Arpeggione Sonata, there's a place with 3 Fs in the development first movement. Here I exchange fingers. Since next I want to shift to the D string, the first step again is to let the bow disappear. Then I let the string come up, relax the wrist, find the new position. Here's the D with the thumb, press down with the second and only then bring the bow back. There's the note. In the meantime, the wrist always should relax. When you're dealing with passages within one position, for example, in Schumann's 5 Stücken in Volkston, the first one, we have this passage.
Da gibt's eine Passage.
Which of course doesn't give me a single place to relax. It takes strength throughout. But once I have arrived on the F, I can relax here. When I jump up from the F, remember the wrist and forearm are building a unit for applying strength. If I don't release, the fingers will squeeze and the bow follows with an ugly sound. But if I release with a jump, I can play a nice and powerful B flat. And notice how I relax the right hand as well. The wrist relaxes too. The whole arm is flying. So if there's enough time, relaxation also happens in the whole right arm, which means the shoulder shouldn't tense up, but should drop down. So all the parts of the arm, the upper arm, forearm, and all the joints work together optimally. During a passage, obviously, there are only few places for complete relaxation, but as I have explained, consistently look for tiny moments all over. You'll find many, many more than you ever would have expected.